Good evening, folks, and welcome to this week's episode of Beer Rating with Sean Connors. The beer I have today, as you can see, it's a Marzen Oktoberfest. Now, just before I get going, I just want to say I've been doing these videos now for about 10 months, and throughout that time I've had some pretty interesting beers. I mean, I've had a beer made out of iceberg water, a Lincolnheiner. That was the John Jacob Lincolnheiner Schmidt, which was a sour smoked ale, which was really unique because if you even Google it, you're only going to find one or two entries. I mean, it's not well known at all. So that was an interesting one. I've done the Trooper beers, which were the Iron Maiden beers. Did a chai beer, and I did the original Budweiser. Normally when I do these reviews, before I do the reviews, I do a little bit of research to find out a little bit about the beer. And that's where this beer is going to be a little bit unique. This beer, as I do the review, I'm probably going to contradict myself, and the reason I'm doing that is because in my research I got contradictory information. Now I think I figured it out, but you're going to have to bear with me, and hopefully I won't confuse you too much. So to get started, I'll pour it up and we'll go from there. First of all, as per always, I'm going to give my glass a quick cold water rinse. And then we'll pour it up, read the label, and then I'll talk about a little bit about this style of beer, and we'll go from there. Like I said, it could be a little confusing because researching it was confusing for me, which is funny because it's a Marzen Oktoberfest beer. And I figure, okay, this is pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, not so much. This beer can go one of two ways, what I'm thinking. And it's pretty well there. Alright, so the brewery is Kitty Vitty Brewery. That's one I've done several beers of. The iceberg beer was one of them. It's a brewery here in St. John's, Newfoundland. I say here, but I'm actually on the outskirts of St. John's. It's been around, I think, since 1996. A couple of engineers got together and started it. It's actually the first microbrewery in Newfoundland. So the beer is Kitty Vitty. They say small batch, so it's a seasonal beer. Oktoberfest Lager Marzen. 5.5% alcohol, and that's pretty well in. Alright. So I'll pour it up. Not a bad aroma. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the beer and a little bit about Oktoberfest because it all kind of goes together. As I said, this one is Oktoberfest Lager Marzen, which sounds pretty straightforward, but when I actually talk about it, you're going to go, as I did, and still I am a little bit. Alright, Marzen, first of all, is a German word for March. It's a seasonal beer. It's from, Marzen itself is from the area of Germany, Bavarian. Other names for this beer are Marzen beer, and that's beer B-I-E-R, which is a German word for beer. So you have Marzen beer, Weizen Marzen, Fest beer, Oktoberfest. Now some places will use those 5 words, Marzen beer, Weiner Marzen, Fest beer, and Oktoberfest beer. They'll use them interchangeably. Other ones, not so much, and especially not in Germany. Okay, so the name Marzen is March. And the reason for that is because it was brewed in March, traditionally. Not anymore, obviously, but traditionally before refrigeration. And just a quick history lesson. In 1553, in Bavaria, they actually enacted a law that said you can only brew beer between St. Michael's Day, which is the 29th of September, and St. George's Day in the 23rd of April. So basically during the fall and winter, early spring was the only time you could brew beer. And the reason for that is that a lot of beers before refrigeration, a lot of summer beers, they were more susceptible to bacteria and wild yeast, which would actually ruin the beer. They infect the beer and ruin it. So the rulers at the time basically said, okay, enough of this foolishness, you can only brew beer in the colder months, basically. So they would brew the beer in the colder months, and they would store it in caves to lager. And lager basically means to store. That's where the word came from. They would actually increase the hops, and one of the reasons for that, they want to increase the alcohol as well, so it wouldn't go bad during the long storage. And a lot of times, the Marzen was brewed in March, so it was one of the last ones they brewed. And basically, they were trying to, at that point, they were trying to get rid of, the hops that they had left over, the yeast, whatever case might be. So back then, actually, a Marzen beer, it wasn't specifically a specific style of beer. It was basically a class of beer that were brewed in March. So the one that I brewed back, in 1553, might not be the same one that my neighbor or buddy the farmer down the road brewed, or whatever the case might be. But they were all considered Marzen because they were brewed in March. And they all basically, because of the way they were made and the way they were stored, and the fact that they're a lager, basically mean they were known to be crisp, flavorful, and they were a fresh drink for the autumn celebration, which, the harvest celebration. Normally full-bodied, lightly sweet, somewhat malty. The color, it kind of varied. Again, it depended on, who made it and what they were using. So that's where the name Marzen came from. And back then, all Marzen beers were beers brewed in March, and they had specific characteristics that were known among them. So that was 1553. So all beers brewed in March were known as Marzen. Going to fast forward a couple of years to 1810, and there was a royal wedding between the Prince of Bavaria and his bride, type of thing. And actually, at the time, the festival itself, it was an autumn festival. It was more of an agricultural festival. Fast forward, I believe it's about 8 years later, around 1818. I could be off a little bit. The royal wedding, it was that time. It became an annual celebration. In 1818, about 8 years later, they added beer, and that's became Oktoberfest. And at the time, this is where it gets, okay, first I'll talk a little bit about Oktoberfest. Oktoberfest today, it's a festival in Munich, the traditional Oktoberfest, or the original Oktoberfest. It's a festival in Munich, which is in the Bavarian Peninsula in Germany. It's normally about 6 to 18 days, and although it's called Oktoberfest, the majority of the festival, funnily enough, is actually in September. Normally, mid-September. It's normally, I think, 2 weeks in September and 1 week in October. And as I said, it started with the 1810 royal wedding. Nowadays, they get about 6 million visitors per year. I think they maxed out in 85. I think it was 7.1. And I've never been. It's on my bucket list. Actually, I better take a drink of this. Ooh. Definitely flavorful. It's 5.5. Actually, to me, it's a little bit stronger, but it is what it is. Anyway, back to the Oktoberfest. You go there nowadays, there's different tents set up, and some tents, I guess every tent, they have, their different decor, different characteristics. Some of the tents are huge. I mean, you're talking like 10,000 people sitting. That's what some of the tents can do. So, they have the tent inside, outside type thing, and they're set up all over the city. And usually, you're going to get your big Oktoberfest mug. The normal one they use there is about 1 liter. And I think on average they're doing about 6.5 million servings in Oktoberfest, which, that's quite a bit of beer, don't get me wrong. But when you had 6 million visitors, I actually thought it'd be a little bit more. Now, they got strict rules for the beer at Oktoberfest. There's only 6 breweries that can brew beer for Oktoberfest, and those are all breweries in Munich proper. They're actually designated brewers, and those 6 breweries are the only ones that can serve Oktoberfest. To call itself Oktoberfest beer. Now, other breweries have tried. There was actually, years back, there was actually a prince that owned a brewery. He tried to introduce his own beer to the Oktoberfest, and it wasn't allowed. So they're pretty serious about this. Now, this is when it gets a little bit confusing, because other breweries can serve beer, from my understanding. However, they can't call it Oktoberfest beer. It has to be called an Oktoberfest style beer. Unless they're one of the 6 breweries. Now, to get a little bit more confusing again, that law saying only the 6 breweries can serve their beer at Oktoberfest as an Oktoberfest beer. Okay, clear enough. That's the case all over Europe. If you go to England, Spain, anywhere else in Europe, you're not going to find an Oktoberfest beer. You might find an Oktoberfest style beer, or you can find Marzen for sure, but not Oktoberfest. Now the thing is, if you come to North America, that rule doesn't apply. So breweries in North America can have an Oktoberfest beer, even though it's not a traditional Oktoberfest beer, if that makes any sense. Now to get make it a little bit more confusing, this is what North America, if you go to a brewery or a restaurant, if they have an Oktoberfest beer, if you order it, this is what you're going to get. Something a little bit darker. It's not a pale. It's to me it almost got kind of like a red tinge, a little bit darker. If you go to Oktoberfest, you're going to be quite surprised because the beer that you're going to serve isn't going to look anything like this whatsoever. And that's because even though this is a Marzen, the beer at Oktoberfest is going to be an Oktoberfest beer, and it's going to be lighter in color. And you're probably going, okay, what the hell? This makes no sense, because I started off saying the term Marzen, Oktoberfest beer, Fest beer, Weizen Marzen, and whatnot, we're all the same. Some do consider the case, but as I said, in German, Oktoberfest are pretty strict. That's not the case. So I'll go a little timeline. So initially, for the Oktoberfest, back in the 1810s, they served beer. Back then, it was more of a darker beer, a dunkel. And we've had some dunkels, they're basically a dark wheat beer. So that lasted, I mentioned the festival itself, Oktoberfest, started in 1810, a royal wedding. 1818, roughly, they added beer, and that would have been the dunkel. And that was basically the dark, that was the regular beer at the time, because back then, because of the kilning process and the malts that they used, you normally couldn't get a lighter style beer. So the dunkel was the first beer at Oktoberfest. Fast forward to 1872, somebody came up with the Marzen, and it was an amber style beer, much like the ones we in North America consider Oktoberfest. So the Marzen, as a style of beer, that lasted for almost about 100 years, until roughly 1970, give or take a couple times, give or take a couple years, whereby they switched to a golden beer. And that is the beer that they use today. And that, they call it a fest beer, so a festival beer. So that's why I'm saying, if you buy an Oktoberfest in North America, you're going to get something like this. Whereas you buy a beer at Oktoberfest in Munich, it's going to be a golden color. So hopefully I didn't confuse you too much. Like I said, other things you might think, you might get a Marzen, they might call it a seasonal beer, or you might get an Oktoberfest style beer. So hopefully I didn't confuse anybody, but that's basically the gist of it. So the Marzen is basically your amber beer. Your Oktoberfest or your Fest beer would be a much lighter colored beer. And as I said, I've never been to Oktoberfest in Munich. I've been to ones in North America. Not quite the same. And funnily enough, our Oktoberfest in North America, we traditionally celebrated towards the end of October. Almost Oktoberfest, kind of Halloween. They're not linked together, but it's within a couple weeks of each other. Whereas in Germany, Munich, it's more end of September, early October. So hopefully I didn't confuse people too much, but that's just a little bit of general information. So if you ever if you try your North American Oktoberfest and then you go to Germany for Oktoberfest, you'll know why there's a difference. Alright, so I have to give a rating for this one. Right off the bat, it's not a bad beer, but it's not one that I would, go out of my way for. It's a little bit more flavorful than what I'm used to. It's definitely clean, crisp. There's no strong aftertaste. Getting a little bit of aftertaste, but not much. My rating, as per usual, it's out of 5. 1 being not going to finish it, don't like it. A 2 being, not a fan, but I'm not going to waste it, I'll finish it. A 3 is a good beer. A 4 is a very good beer. And a 5 is the best beer I've ever had. This beer, I think it's not even really argument for me. I think I'm comfortable giving it a 3.0. It's a good beer. If I'm somewhere and I was given another one, by all means, I'd definitely finish it. I'd definitely enjoy it. But it's not something I'd go out of my way for, saying, oh my God, I gotta have it. Can't wait to have the next one. So there you go, folks. That's my rating for the Kitty Vitty Small Batch Oktoberfest Lager Marzen. That's about it. I hope everybody enjoyed the review, and I hope I added a little bit of information, and hopefully I didn't confuse you too much. If I did, feel free to add a comment on either the Facebook page or the YouTube, and feel free to share both of those. If you have a question, add it there, and I'll hopefully try to answer it next week. If you have any suggestions for other beers that you think I would like to try, or you'd like to see me try, let me know. Going into November, I'm actually going to try something new for November. I'm going to try to come up with a style of beer or a region for the entire month. And right now, I'm thinking for November, I'm going to do sour beers. So I'm going to spend the 4 or 5 reviews for that month are going to be different sour beers. Down the road, I wouldn't mind doing specific countries. Do one for England, one for Belgium, one for Germany, one for Czechoslovakia type of thing. So for that month, I'll stick with beers for that area. So if you have any suggestions on what I should do for a monthly topic, by all means, let me know. Once again, either on Facebook or YouTube. So there you go, folks. That's my review for this week. Until next week, excuse me. Until next beer, enjoy responsibly, and cheers, and hope to see you again soon.